vast, open landscape. Rolling hills meet a bright, blue sky. Young David sits on a rock, playing his harp. Sheep graze peacefully in the green pasture. Close up on David's hands strumming the harp strings. The camera pans across the flock of sheep. David looks up at the sky, lost in thought. A gentle breeze rustles through the grass. David smiles, his face filled with peace. He sings a psalm of praise, his voice echoing in the hills. A wide shot of David and his flock in the valley. Close up on a lamb, bleating softly. David watches over his sheep, a shepherd's staff in hand. He gently guides a stray sheep back to the flock. A dark cloud appears on the horizon. David scans the sky, his expression turning serious. The wind picks up, and the sheep begin to huddle together. David stands tall, ready to protect his flock. He spots a wolf lurking in the distance. David grabs his sling, his eyes fixed on the predator. He expertly loads a stone into the sling. David whirls the sling around his head. He releases the stone, aiming with precision. The stone hits the wolf, driving it away. The sheep scatter in fear, then slowly regroup. David calms the flock with his gentle voice. He inspects the area, ensuring the wolf is gone. The sun begins to set, casting a warm glow. David leads his flock towards the sheepfold. The sheep follow him obediently. Close up on David's worn leather sandals. He walks with a confident stride, a protector of his sheep. They reach the sheepfold, a safe haven for the night. David counts the sheep, making sure none are missing. He secures the entrance to the sheepfold. David sits by the fire, watching over his flock. The stars twinkle in the night sky. He picks up his harp and begins to play a soft melody. The sheep settle down, comforted by his music. David closes his eyes, lost in prayer. He gives thanks to God for his protection. Close up on David's peaceful face as he sleeps. The fire crackles softly, casting shadows on the sheepfold. The first rays of dawn peek over the horizon. David wakes up, refreshed and ready for the day. He opens the sheepfold and leads the flock out. They head towards the green pastures, ready to graze. David smiles, grateful for another day. He continues his journey, a shepherd with a heart for God. A bird soars overhead, a symbol of freedom. David's silhouette against the rising sun. He pauses to drink from a clear stream. The water reflects his youthful face. David continues to play his harp, filling the air with music. He is content in his simple life as a shepherd. David is unaware of the great destiny that awaits him. He is simply faithful in the small things. His heart is pure, and his spirit is strong. God is shaping him in the solitude of the fields. These are the unseen moments that define him. David, the shepherd, a man after God's own heart. David plays his harp, the music echoing through the quiet fields, sheep grazing peacefully. The camera pans to Jesse's house, bustling with activity, a stark contrast to the fields. Inside, David's older brothers train with swords, their movements strong and confident. Jesse watches them proudly, a smile on his face, clearly pleased with his sons. The brothers laugh and joke, their camaraderie evident, a sense of belonging. David arrives, dusty and tired from the fields, unnoticed by his brothers. Jesse glances at David dismissively, then turns his attention back to the older sons. David stands awkwardly, feeling out of place, the joy of his music fading. One of the brothers scoffs, calling David a shepherd boy with disdain. The others chuckle, reinforcing David's sense of isolation and rejection. David lowers his head, trying to hide his hurt, the words stinging like barbs. Jesse instructs David to return to the fields, his tone curt and dismissive. David nods silently, accepting his father's command without argument. He turns and walks away, his shoulders slumped, the weight of rejection heavy. The brothers continue their training, oblivious to David's departure and pain. Outside, David pauses, looking back at the house, a mix of sadness and longing. He turns and walks towards the fields, the familiar landscape offering a small comfort. The sun beats down on him, mirroring the burning feeling of being unseen. He reaches the open fields, the sheep bleating softly as they graze. David sits down beneath a tree, pulling out his harp, his fingers strumming a mournful tune. The music reflects his inner turmoil, a lament for the acceptance he craves. He closes his eyes, seeking solace in the presence of God, a refuge from the world. A close-up on David's face, showing the pain and vulnerability in his eyes. He whispers a prayer, asking for strength and guidance, seeking God's approval. The camera pans up to the sky, a vast expanse of blue symbolizing God's presence. David continues to play, the music gradually shifting from sorrow to hope. He remembers the simple joys of shepherding, the beauty of nature, the peace he finds there. He realizes that true worth lies not in outward appearance or the approval of men, but in the heart, in the quiet acts of faith and obedience. In seeking God's will, he resolves to focus on pleasing God, to be faithful in the small things, to trust in his plan. David looks out at the flock, a sense of responsibility and purpose returning to him. He stands up, his posture straighter, his eyes filled with determination. He begins to tend the sheep, guiding them to fresh pasture, protecting them from harm. He sings a psalm of praise, his voice filled with renewed confidence and joy. The music echoes through the hills, a testament to his unwavering faith. A close-up on David's hands as he gently cares for a lamb, showing his compassion. He looks up at the sky again, a sense of peace and contentment washing over him. He knows that God sees him, that he values him, that he has a purpose for his life. While his brothers seek the approval of men, David seeks the approval of God. He understands that true greatness is found not in outward glory, but an inward character. He continues to shepherd the flock, his heart filled with gratitude and hope. The sun begins to set, casting a golden glow over the landscape. David gathers the sheep, preparing to lead them back to the fold. He looks back at Jesse's house, a sense of peace replacing the earlier pain. He knows that he is where he is meant to be, doing what he is meant to do. He turns and walks towards the fold, the sheep following closely behind. The camera follows David, a small figure against the vast landscape, his heart strong. He is David, the shepherd boy, chosen by God, destined for greatness. A wide shot of the fields as darkness falls, the only sound the bleating of sheep. David leads the sheep into the safety of the fold, securing the gate. He looks up at the stars, a sense of wonder and awe filling his heart. He knows that God is watching over him, guiding him, protecting him. He whispers a final prayer of thanks, his heart overflowing with gratitude. He lies down to sleep, the sheep nestled around him, feeling safe and secure. A close-up on David's face as he sleeps peacefully, a smile on his lips. The camera pans up to the starry sky, a symbol of God's eternal love and promise. The wind whispers through the fields, carrying the scent of grass and sheep. The night is quiet, peaceful, and filled with the presence of God. David sleeps soundly, dreaming of the future, trusting in God's plan. The first rays of dawn peek over the horizon, heralding a new day. David tends sheep, unseen and overlooked, while his brothers are favored. He finds solace in God's presence, seeking divine approval. Jesse's sons stand tall, confident, expecting Samuel's arrival. Samuel arrives at Jesse's house, looking weary but determined. Jesse presents his eldest son, Eliab, to Samuel. Eliab stands tall, muscular, radiating strength and confidence. Samuel almost anoints Eliab, impressed by his outward appearance. God's voice whispers to Samuel, "Do not consider his appearance." Samuel looks confused, questioning his own judgment. Jesse presents Abinadab, his second son, to Samuel. Abinadab is strong, handsome, but lacks a certain spark. God tells Samuel, "I have not chosen this one either." Jesse presents Shammah, his third son, to Samuel. Samuel shakes his head, disappointment etched on his face. God repeats, "I have not chosen him." Jesse presents 7 sons, one after another, to Samuel. Samuel asks Jesse, "Are these all the sons you have?" Jesse hesitates, a flicker of embarrassment crossing his face. Jesse replies, "There remains yet the youngest, and behold, he keeps the sheep." Samuel says, "Send and get him, for we will not sit down till he comes here." A servant rushes off to find David in the fields. David is in the fields, tending the sheep with his staff. The servant approaches David, breathless and urgent. "Servant, Samuel the prophet is here. He asks for you." David looks surprised, questioning why he is needed. David quickly gathers his things, leaving the sheep safe. David arrives at Jesse's house, dusty and windblown. Samuel sees David, a glimmer of recognition in his eyes. God's voice confirms, "Arise, anoint him, for this is the one." David stands before Samuel, humble and unassuming. Samuel takes the horn of oil, a sacred vessel. He pours the oil over David's head, a golden stream. The oil soaks into David's hair. A fragrant aroma fills the air. David kneels, head bowed, accepting the anointing. The Spirit of the Lord rushes upon David from that day forward. David feels a surge of power, a divine purpose awakening. Samuel rises, his task complete, a sense of peace. Jesse looks on, bewildered, unsure of what just happened. David rises, a newfound confidence in his eyes. The brothers stare at David, a mix of jealousy and confusion. Samuel departs, leaving David with the weight of his destiny. Close up on David's face, a mixture of awe and uncertainty. David looks down at his hands, now marked by divine touch. He looks out at the fields, seeing them with new eyes. The sun sets, casting long shadows across the landscape. David walks away from the house, back towards the fields. He is alone with his thoughts, processing the anointing. The sheep bleat softly, sensing a change in their shepherd. David picks up his harp, his fingers instinctively finding the strings. He begins to play a soft, melodic tune, a song of praise. The music echoes through the hills, a testament to his faith. David looks up at the stars, feeling connected to God's creation. He knows his life has changed forever, but the path is unclear. He trusts in God's plan, ready to face whatever comes next. Close up on David's eyes, filled with determination and hope. David continues to play his harp, his heart filled with gratitude. The night deepens, enveloping David in its embrace. He is the shepherd, the chosen one, the future king. The camera pans out, showing David as a small figure in a vast landscape. The music fades, leaving only the sound of the wind. David, now anointed, walks back towards the hills, head bowed slightly. Close up on David's face, a mix of confusion and humility etched upon it. The sun begins to dip below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple. Long shadows stretch across the landscape, emphasizing David's small figure. David stops, looking out at the vast expanse before him, lost in thought. He touches his head where Samuel poured the oil, a silent reminder. Flashback. Samuel anointing David, the oil glistening in the light. Back to David in the present, his expression still uncertain. He has no crown, no royal robes, only his simple shepherd's clothes, close up on his hands, calloused from years of tending sheep. He clutches his shepherd's staff, a familiar comfort in this moment. David sighs, the weight of the promise settling upon his shoulders. He begins walking again, his pace slow and deliberate. The fields seem different now, imbued with a sense of destiny. Close up on the grass beneath his feet, swaying gently in the breeze. The sheep graze peacefully, oblivious to the momentous event. A lamb bleats softly, breaking the silence of the evening. David smiles faintly, a flicker of understanding in his eyes. He is still David, the shepherd, but something has fundamentally changed. Close up on his eyes, now filled with a newfound determination. He looks up at the sky, as if seeking guidance from above. The stars begin to appear, twinkling in the darkening sky. David whispers a prayer, his voice barely audible. He remembers the words of Samuel, the prophecy spoken over him. Flashback, Samuel's voice echoing, "God has chosen you." Back to David, his face illuminated by the faint starlight. He feels a surge of power within him, a divine energy. He knows that the road ahead will not be easy, but he is not afraid. Close up on his hand, gripping the shepherd's staff tightly. He is ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead. He trusts in God's plan, even though he doesn't fully understand it. He continues walking, his steps now more confident and purposeful. The sheep follow him, their trust unwavering. The sun has completely disappeared, leaving the landscape in darkness. Only the stars provide a faint glimmer of light. David hums a familiar song, his voice filled with emotion. The music echoes through the hills, a testament to his faith. He thinks of his family, his father, and brothers. He wonders what they will think when they learn of his anointing. He knows that they may not understand, but he doesn't need their approval. He only needs God's approval, and he knows that he has it. He reaches the crest of a hill and pauses, looking back at the valley below. The lights of his village twinkle in the distance. He feels a sense of longing, but also a sense of anticipation. He knows that he will return to the village soon, but he will never be the same. He turns and continues walking, disappearing into the darkness. The only sound is the gentle bleating of the sheep and the rustling of the grass. Close up on the oil stain on his head, a symbol of his divine calling. The wind whispers through the trees, carrying a message of hope. David is ready for the future, whatever it may hold. He is a shepherd with a king's heart, chosen by God. He is David, and his journey has just begun. Wide shot of the hills, under the starry sky, David a small figure, close up of David's worn sandals as he walks on the path. David's silhouette against the moonlit sky, staff in hand. The sheep huddle together for warmth as the night grows colder. David wraps his cloak tighter around himself, a solitary figure. He looks up at the stars again, a silent conversation with God. A sense of peace settles over him, despite the uncertainty. David continues his journey, the anointed shepherd on his destined path. David walked back into the hills, a small figure against the vast sunset sky. The journey ahead remained shrouded in mystery, anointing marking a new beginning. Fields, one's simple duty, now resonated with divine purpose. He would continue to tend the flock, heart attuned to God's calling. David paused, looking over his flock. The sheep grazed peacefully, their wool catching the fading light. He smiled faintly, a sense of calm washing over him. But in the distance, a low growl echoed through the hills. David's eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon. A shadow moved at the edge of the trees. He gripped his shepherd's staff, his heart pounding. A large lion emerged from the darkness, eyes fixed on the flock. The sheep scattered in panic, bleeding in fear. David stood his ground, a determined look on his face. He raised his staff, ready to defend his sheep. The lion roared, a terrifying sound that shook the hills. David charged forward, his staff raised high. He swung the staff with all his might, striking the lion's flank. The lion stumbled back, surprised by the attack. David pressed his advantage, striking again and again. The lion roared in pain, swiping at David with its claws. David dodged the attack, his movements quick and agile. He leaped onto the lion's back, wrestling it to the ground. The lion thrashed wildly, trying to shake him off. David held on tight, his grip unyielding. He reached for the lion's mane, pulling it back with force. The lion roared in agony, its strength waning. David tightened his grip, choking the beast. Finally, the lion went limp, its body still. David stood up, panting, his clothes torn and bloody. He looked down at the fallen lion, a sense of victory washing over him. He had protected his flock, just as he had promised. He looked up at the sky, thanking God for his strength. The sun had almost completely set, casting a warm glow. He gathered the scattered sheep, leading them back to safety. As he walked, he thought about the anointing. The giant was coming, the challenges were looming. But David was ready, prepared in the unseen places. His faith tested and his spirit strengthened. He was ready to face whatever lay ahead. He knew that God was with him, always. David continued his walk back to the village. The stars began to appear in the night sky. He could hear the distant sounds of the village. He felt a sense of peace and contentment. He was still David, the shepherd. But he was also David, the chosen one. He knew that his life would never be the same. He would embrace the challenges that lay ahead. He would trust in God's plan for his life. He would be a shepherd to his people. He would be a king after God's own heart. The weight of the promise settled upon him. He would not fail. He would lead with courage and compassion. He would always remember the lessons he learned in the fields. He would always be grateful for God's grace. He would always be David, the shepherd. David smiled, looking up at the stars. He was ready.
Dust motes dance in the fading sunlight over the valley of Elah. David stands, small but resolute, over the fallen giant Goliath. Goliath's massive form casts a long shadow across the battlefield. The silence is profound, a stark contrast to the recent chaos. Ragged breaths of Israelite soldiers punctuate the stillness. They stare in disbelief at the impossible scene before them. Saul the king observes David from atop a small rise. A flicker of unease crosses Saul's weathered face. The giant is defeated, a victory hard won and celebrated. But the air is thick with unspoken tension and uncertainty. David doesn't revel in the cheers that begin to erupt. His young face is etched with a quiet understanding. He grasps the weight of the moment, the burden of victory. He is no longer just a shepherd boy from Bethlehem. He is something more, something powerful and unknown. This transformation unsettles the very king who should rejoice. Close up on David's hand, still gripping Goliath's sword. The sword is far too large for him, a symbol of the task ahead. Wide shot of the Israelite army, slowly regaining their composure. They look to David with a mix of awe and expectation. Saul descends from the rise, his expression unreadable. He approaches David with a deliberate, measured pace. The cheers grow louder, a deafening wave of adulation. "Well done, young David," Saul says, his voice booming. David bows his head slightly, acknowledging the king. His eyes meet Saul's, a brief but intense connection. Saul claps David on the shoulder, a gesture that feels forced. The king's smile doesn't quite reach his eyes. A soldier approaches, offering David a water skin. David takes a long drink, quenching his thirst and calming his nerves. The camera focuses on Saul's gaze, fixed on David. A subtle shift in his demeanor, a hint of something darker. The sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the valley. The celebration continues, but the atmosphere has subtly changed. David stands apart, observing the revelry with a thoughtful expression. He seems detached, as if already preparing for what comes next. Saul watches David, his mind racing with conflicting thoughts. Is this boy a blessing or a curse? He wonders silently. The weight of the crown feels heavier than ever before. Close up on Saul's hand, clenching into a fist. He is a king accustomed to power, and this feels like a threat. David turns and walks towards the setting sun. His silhouette stands out against the fiery sky. He is walking towards his destiny, whatever it may be. Saul continues to watch him, his eyes filled with a growing unease. The celebration fades into the background. Only Saul and David remain in focus. The shepherd boy and the king, their fates intertwine. The valley of Elah holds its breath, waiting for what's to come. A sense of foreboding hangs heavy in the air. David pauses, looking back at Saul for a fleeting moment. Their eyes lock again. A silent challenge passes between them. David turns away and continues his journey. Saul remains standing, alone in his thoughts. The sun dips below the horizon, plunging the valley into darkness. The era of the shepherd has begun, and the shadow of the king looms large. The air crackles with unspoken tension. David's destiny awaits him. The future is uncertain, but one thing is clear: everything has changed. The dust settles, revealing David standing over Goliath's massive body. Victorious soldiers begin to cheer, but David remains somber and still. Israel's army surges forward, a wave of soldiers chasing the fleeing Philistines. The Philistines break ranks, scattering in a disorganized and panicked retreat. David walks through the cheering crowd, his expression thoughtful and distant. He carries Goliath's sword, its massive size emphasizing his youth. The weight of the sword seems symbolic of the burden he now carries. David approaches Saul, who watches him with a calculating gaze. Saul sits on his throne, surrounded by his advisors and military leaders. The king's expression is unreadable, a mix of curiosity and suspicion. Close up on Saul's eyes, revealing a flicker of something unsettling. David kneels before Saul, offering him Goliath's sword as a trophy. Saul accepts the sword, his fingers brushing against David's hand. The king rises from his throne, his shadow falling over David. Saul addresses the crowd, his voice booming across the valley. Saul, Israel has been delivered, he proclaims with forced enthusiasm. The crowd roars its approval, their cheers echoing through the hills. Saul signals for David to rise, his gaze fixed on the young shepherd. Saul, "Who is this boy?" he asks, his voice low and probing. Abner, Saul's general, steps forward, looking unsure how to answer. "Abner, I do not know," he admits, glancing nervously at the king. Saul descends from his throne, approaching David with slow steps. Saul circles David, observing him like a general assessing an enemy. "Saul, whose son are you, young man?" he asks, his tone sharp. "David, I am the son of your servant, Jesse of Bethlehem." Saul studies David's face, searching for any sign of deception. He sees the courage in David's eyes, the unwavering faith. Saul also senses a threat, a challenge to his own authority. "Saul, you are but a youth," he says, his voice laced with doubt. "David, the Lord who delivered me from the lion and bear will deliver me." Saul nods slowly, impressed by David's unwavering conviction. "Saul, you have shown great courage, David. Come with me." Saul gestures for David to follow him into his royal tent. The crowd watches as David and Saul disappear into the tent. Whispers ripple through the crowd, speculating about David's future. Inside the tent, Saul offers David a seat, a gesture of respect. "Saul, tell me, David, what drove you to face Goliath?" "David, my faith in the Lord and my desire to protect Israel." Saul leans forward, his eyes narrowing. "And what are your ambitions?" "David, to serve God and my king with all my heart." Saul smiles, but the smile doesn't reach his eyes. "Saul, you are a remarkable young man, David. I can use you." Saul offers David a position in his court, a place among his warriors. David accepts the offer, grateful for the king's favor. Saul presents David with a suit of armor, a symbol of his new status. David tries on the armor, but it feels heavy and cumbersome. He removes the armor, feeling more comfortable in his simple clothes. David: "I am not used to these," he says, handing the armor back. Saul observes David, a hint of amusement in his eyes. "Saul, you are different, David. That is why I need you." Saul leads David out of the tent, presenting him to the cheering crowd. "Saul, behold David, the hero of Israel," he announces. The crowd erupts in cheers, showering David with praise and adoration. David stands beside Saul, his expression humble and grateful. But in the shadows, Saul's face is dark with a growing unease. He has brought David into his service, but at what cost? Saul glances at David, a storm brewing in his eyes. The seeds of jealousy have been planted, and they will soon sprout. David smiles at the crowd, unaware of the danger that lies ahead. The victory is sweet, but the shadow of Saul looms large. David is brought before Saul, the king's eyes filled with a strange mix of emotions. Saul, captivated yet unnerved, decides to bring David into his royal service. David, humble and skilled, quickly gains favor amongst the people of Israel. Saul observes the growing admiration for David, his unease steadily increasing. The king bestows honors upon David, a forced smile masking his inner turmoil. Whispers of David's bravery spread like wildfire, eclipsing Saul's own achievements. Saul's initial admiration for David slowly curdles into bitter resentment. He begins to see David not as a hero, but as a potential rival for his throne. Saul's eyes narrow as he watches David interact with the adoring crowds. The king clenches his fist, the seeds of discord taking root in his heart. David plays his harp for Saul, attempting to soothe the king's troubled mind. Saul stares blankly ahead, lost in his thoughts of jealousy and suspicion. The court begins to notice the growing tension between the king and the shepherd. Advisors whisper amongst themselves, sensing the shift in the balance of power. Saul summons his most trusted advisors, seeking their counsel on the David situation. The advisors, sensing Saul's paranoia, subtly fuel his fears about David's ambition. Saul paces back and forth in his chambers, consumed by his inner demons. He glances at his crown, a symbol of the power he fears losing to David. David leads the Israelite army to victory against the Philistine raiding parties. The people celebrate David's military prowess, chanting his name with fervor. Saul watches from the palace balcony, his face a mask of forced approval. He knows that each victory for David further diminishes his own standing. The king's resentment grows with each passing day, poisoning his thoughts and actions. Saul begins to isolate David, limiting his access to the royal court. He assigns David increasingly dangerous missions, hoping he will fail or be killed. David, unaware of Saul's true intentions, accepts each challenge with unwavering faith. He continues to succeed, further fueling Saul's envy and paranoia. The bond between king and shepherd begins to fray, strained by suspicion and deceit. Saul's advisors plot against David, whispering doubts into the king's ear. "He is too popular, Your Majesty. The people love him more than they love you. He seeks to usurp your throne, to take your kingdom for himself." Saul listens intently, his mind poisoned by their insidious words. He begins to see David as a threat, a viper in his own court. The court becomes a viper's nest of intrigue and betrayal, smiles masking daggers. David remains oblivious to the danger surrounding him, trusting in his faith. He continues to serve Saul with loyalty and dedication. Unaware of the king's malice, Saul watches David from afar, his eyes filled with a mixture of hatred and fear. He knows that he must act, that he cannot allow David to continue to rise in power. The king's mind is consumed by thoughts of how to eliminate David. He plots and schemes, seeking a way to rid himself of the shepherd boy. Saul's paranoia intensifies, driving him to the brink of madness. He sees enemies everywhere, even in those who were once his closest allies. The king's grip on reality begins to slip, his judgment clouded by envy and fear. David continues to play his harp for Saul, hoping to bring him peace. But the music no longer has any effect on the king's troubled soul. Saul remains consumed by his dark thoughts, his heart hardened against David. The seeds of discord have been sown, and the bond between king and shepherd is broken. David is caught in the center of a dangerous game, unaware of the true stakes. He is surrounded by enemies, their smiles masking daggers poised to strike. Saul's jealousy is a consuming fire, threatening to destroy everything in its path. The king's reign is teetering on the edge of chaos, fueled by his own paranoia. David's fate hangs in the balance, uncertain and perilous. The court holds its breath, waiting for the inevitable explosion. Saul's eyes dart around the room, filled with suspicion and distrust. He sees betrayal in every face, a constant reminder of his own insecurity. David bows before Saul, offering his service and loyalty. Saul stares back, his expression unreadable, a storm brewing within. The tension in the room is palpable, thick with unspoken threats. The stage is set for a tragic confrontation, a clash between king and shepherd. The shadow of Saul's envy looms large, casting a dark cloud over David's future. Saul watched David from his throne, a dark cloud settling over his face. David bowed low, oblivious to the king's simmering resentment. Saul subtly began to test David's loyalty with increasingly difficult tasks. He ordered David to lead troops into dangerous battles, hoping he would fail. David returned victorious each time, his reputation growing with every triumph. The people cheered David's name, their voices echoing through the kingdom. Saul clenched his fists, the sound of their praise grating on his ears. He saw David as a constant reminder of his own fading glory. The king's advisors noticed Saul's growing animosity towards David. They saw an opportunity to gain favor by turning Saul against the shepherd. One advisor, Abner, approached Saul with a sly smile. "Your Majesty," Abner whispered, "the people love David too much. They may forget who their true king is," another advisor added. Saul listened intently, his eyes narrowing with suspicion. The advisors planted seeds of doubt, questioning David's motives. "He seeks to usurp your throne, Your Majesty," Abner hissed. Saul paced back and forth, his mind consumed by paranoia. He began to see David's every action as a calculated move against him. David remained faithful and unaware of the treachery brewing around him. He served Saul with unwavering loyalty, oblivious to the danger. One day, Saul summoned David to his chambers. The king sat on his throne, his face a mask of false cordiality. "David," Saul said, his voice laced with venom, "play for me." David picked up his harp and began to play a soothing melody. As the music filled the room, Saul's eyes grew dark with rage. He grabbed a spear and hurled it at David with murderous intent. David, startled, barely managed to dodge the spear. The spear embedded itself in the wall behind him. David realized the true depth of Saul's hatred. He knew he was no longer safe in the king's presence. Saul lunged again, his eyes filled with madness. David quickly dodged a second spear, fear gripping his heart. He knew he had to escape before Saul succeeded in killing him. David fled from the palace, his life hanging in the balance. He ran through the streets, pursued by Saul's guards. He sought refuge in the wilderness, a fugitive from the king. Saul ordered his soldiers to hunt David down and bring him back. The king was determined to eliminate the threat to his throne. David wandered through the desolate landscape, alone and afraid. He sought shelter in caves and hid among the rocks. He was an outcast, hunted by the very king he had served. Yet, even in exile, David's faith remained strong. He knew that God had a plan for him, even in this dark hour. He gathered a small band of loyal followers around him. These men were outcasts and rebels drawn to David's courage. They pledged their allegiance to David, vowing to protect him. David became their leader, guiding them through the wilderness. They lived off the land, hunted for food, and slept under the stars. Saul's pursuit of David intensified, his anger growing with each failure. The king was consumed by his obsession with eliminating David. He saw David as a symbol of defiance, a challenge to his authority. The kingdom was divided, some supporting Saul, others siding with David. The seeds of civil war were sown, threatening to tear Israel apart. David knew he had to make a choice, fight back, or continue to flee. He prayed for guidance, seeking God's will in this desperate situation. He knew that the fate of Israel rested on his shoulders. The weight of responsibility pressed down on him, heavy and burdensome. He was no longer just a shepherd boy, he was a leader, a warrior, a king in waiting. His destiny was unfolding before him, one step at a time. David prepared himself for the challenges ahead. His faith, his only shield. Saul glares at David, his eyes filled with a burning rage. He throws a spear, aiming directly at David's back as he plays the harp. David ducks just in time, the spear lodging itself in the wall behind him. He stares at the spear, realization dawning on his face. Saul wants him dead. Another day, another accident. A heavy vase falls near David. David confronts Jonathan, Saul's son, his voice filled with disbelief and hurt. "Your father seeks my life." "Why?" David asks, desperate for answers. Jonathan, torn between loyalty to his father and love for David, looks distraught. "I will find out his intentions and warn you," Jonathan promises, his voice low. Jonathan pleads with Saul, defending David's loyalty and bravery. Saul momentarily relents, promising not to harm David, a false promise. David returns to the court, cautiously optimistic, but the tension is palpable. War breaks out again with the Philistines, and David leads the Israelite army. He achieves another stunning victory, further fueling Saul's jealousy. Saul's advisors whisper in his ear, stoking his paranoia and resentment. Saul, consumed by his inner demons, plots David's demise once more. He orders David to lead a dangerous mission, hoping he will be killed in battle. David, unaware of the treachery, accepts the mission with unwavering faith. He returns victorious, much to Saul's dismay. The people cheer his name. Saul's anger boils over. He orders his men to kill David. Jonathan warns David, urging him to flee for his life immediately. "My father is determined to kill you. Trust me, David. Run." David, heartbroken and betrayed, prepares to leave the palace in secret. He says a tearful goodbye to Jonathan, their friendship tested by Saul's madness. "Go in peace, my brother," Jonathan says, his voice choked with emotion. David slips out of the palace under the cover of darkness, a fugitive now. He wanders through the wilderness, alone and hunted, his future uncertain. David seeks refuge with the priest Ahimelech, lying about his mission. He obtains bread and Goliath's sword from Ahimelech, desperate for supplies. Doeg the Edomite witnesses David's encounter with Ahimelech. David flees to Gath, the Philistine city, seeking asylum from Saul. The Philistines recognize him as the slayer of Goliath and become wary. David feigns madness to escape the Philistines, acting like a lunatic. He scribbles on the city gates and drools on his beard to convince them. The Philistines, disgusted, drive him away, considering him harmless. David escapes and finds refuge in the cave of Adullam, a desolate place. His family and other outcasts join him, forming a small band of followers. They are a ragtag group of debtors, discontented and distressed individuals. David becomes their leader, offering them hope and protection. Saul hears that David is gathering followers and becomes even more enraged. He accuses his own servants of conspiring against him with David. Doeg the Edomite reveals that Ahimelech helped David. Saul orders the execution of Ahimelech and all the priests of Nob. Doeg carries out Saul's brutal command, slaughtering 85 priests. Only Abiathar, Ahimelech's son, escapes the massacre and flees to David. Abiathar tells David about Saul's horrific act of vengeance. David is filled with grief and remorse, feeling responsible for the tragedy. "I knew that Doeg would betray me. I am responsible for their deaths." He promises Abiathar protection and vows to avenge the innocent priests. David continues to lead his band of outcasts, always on the run from Saul. He learns that the Philistines are attacking the city of Keilah. David inquires of the Lord whether he should go and save Keilah. The Lord assures him of victory, but his men are afraid to fight. David inquires of the Lord again, receiving the same assurance. He leads his men to Keilah and defeats the Philistines, saving the city. Saul hears that David is in Keilah and sees it as an opportunity to trap him. David learns of Saul's plan and inquires of the Lord whether the people will betray him. The Lord reveals that the people of Keilah will indeed betray him to Saul. David and his men flee Keilah, narrowly escaping Saul's grasp once more. He continues to wander the wilderness, a fugitive with a price on his head.